everyone, welcome back to In Her Wallet, a podcast helping women around the world take control of their finances for good and build better financial futures one episode at a time. My name is Sofiia. I'm your host, the creator of In Her Wallet podcast, and a licensed investment representative here in Canada. Last week, we talked about workplace benefits, what they are, the different types of workplace benefits, the compensation benefits that you can expect here in Canada, as well as differences from the US. Understanding the benefits you are offered, I think, is the first step to maximizing them. But to really boost your earning potential and power, you can take it a notch further by negotiating these benefits. This is something that gets overlooked often because when we think about a raise, we seem to mainly go after a salary raise. But there is a lot of hidden power in and hidden value in negotiating workplace benefits as well. I want to mention that though today's episode and last week's episode are standalone ones, you'll find a lot of value in listening to both of them as a two-part series, as we build them in a way to complement each other. So, who is helping me find questions on how to negotiate workplace benefits? I have two fantastic guests with me today, Jillian Climie and Sophie Warwick, who are the co-founders of The Thoughtful Call, a Vancouver-based HR company that specializes in supporting women in negotiating their work compensations and also works with companies. So they advise employers on policies to improve gender equality in place. I love that mission. So, welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Thanks.
Thank
Yeah, looking
you.
forward to it.
Thank you for being with me today. So, to start off, let's do a little icebreaker so In Her Wallet community can get to know you a little bit better. Jillian, what's your go-to coffee order?
This is really boring, but black coffee. I do not like fancy stuff. I don't like milk in there. I love just straight black coffee, usually a blonde
Uh-huh.
roast. But yeah, so not the most exciting, but my favorite.
Classy. Sophie, what about you?
Oh, it depends. If my morning coffee at home is always black coffee also. I just love the smell. But if I go out, I love getting a plain latte.
I usually go for the latte too. Okay, and next one. What's your favorite movie that you can rewatch again and again?
Harry Potter, I would have to say for me, that's the first one that comes to mind. I'm actually a person who does not like to rewatch movies. My partner
Yeah.
hates me for this. I don't like to rewatch most movies, but Harry Potter is one of the few that I can definitely rewatch over, especially during the holidays. I love watching it.
Yes. Sophie, what about you?
I'm kind of the opposite. I think my partner hates about me that I love to rewatch movies. I like when it's comfortable and predictable, and probably the top one I rewatch is Bridget Jones' Diary. I always love watching it with my mom and my sister.
Oh my God, I just watched that over the Christmas holiday break for the first time. I
I
loved
love
it
it.
as well. Yeah. And my final question for you, if you could move anywhere in the world right now, where would that be?
That's a tough question. I've actually just moved about 6 months ago to Victoria, and I'm actually really happy here. And I feel like I'm supposed to be here right now. I moved quite a bit,
Yeah.
so I would say here. But if I had my choice, absolutely anywhere, it probably would be Hawaii. I love Hawaii specifically, and both my partner and I think, would probably thrive in Hawaii. So that'd be my place.
I've never been.
Oh, it's amazing. You should definitely go.
Yes, I will. Sophie, what about you?
That's a tough question. I find it hard to pick a specific place, but if there was a criteria, I love Vancouver. That's where I'm based now. But my one qualm with Vancouver is we don't get full 4 seasons, and I would love to be
Hmm.
somewhere we get proper winter, unpopular opinion, but proper fall, proper spring, and proper summer. I love the season change.
Where would that be for you?
Um, Honestly, it's kind of boring, but I guess it would probably be in the kind of Ontario, New York State strip. They get the best fall, and that's my
Yeah,
favorite season, and they still get proper winter too.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you. I also miss that quite a bit. Okay, well, fantastic. Let's dive now into all things negotiating workplace benefits. But before we chat about that, Jillian and Sophie, both of you, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what were your professions before you went on to start the Thoughtful Call?
Yeah, definitely. So before the Thoughtful Co., I spent my career in executive compensation, which is a pretty niche field, but started off in consulting where I helped board of directors figure out how to pay their top executive teams. So that's a lot of salary, but more kind of longer term equity compensation design, bonus structures, all that good stuff. And then I did that in house at Aritzia, which is a Canadian retailer, and then most recently at Lululemon, where I led the global executive and equity compensation teams. So had kind of spent my full career on the other side of the negotiating table and saw so many successful, intelligent women not negotiating their compensation or benefits at really key points in their career. And I always wanted to do
Mm-hmm.
something about that. So about a year and a half ago, left Lululemon to co-found the Thoughtful Co. And now I get to support women with that on a day-to-day basis.
That's very empowering and exciting. I mean, considering that you were on the other side of the table, I think that's what gives you that inside knowledge, tips, and tricks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Sophie, what about you?
I had a bit of a different start. I started my career in structural engineering, mostly working on residential buildings, and it was such a male dominated environment. And I had all these incredible male mentors, but found it very difficult to find women to connect with. And I was feeling like there was a bit of a gap in the support that I needed. And so, in an effort to bring more people into the companies I was working at, or more women specifically, I started the employee resource group and started to look at policies to recruit and retain more women at those companies. And as I started doing that work, I noticed that my experience was certainly not unique and that lots of women were finding that too within the engineering profession. And so in 2018, I co founded the nonprofit Women in Consulting Engineering, or WCE Vancouver, which is a community that builds inclusion for women working in engineering. And I sat as co chair and communications director on that nonprofit for 3 years. And what I found so much is I met so many women, both working in engineering and in other allied professions, that were leaving their industries or leaving the firms they were at because they felt that they weren't getting the support they needed. But at the same
Mm.
time, I was hearing of all these sponsor companies that were desperate to recruit and retain those same women. So everyone was aligned on the goal, but not necessarily translating into action. And I think lots of companies are wanting to recruit and retain more women, but don't necessarily have the capacity or tools to do so. So that's what ultimately led me to partner with Jillian to launch the Thoughtful Co. So we could build better workplaces for women in more industries and in more regions.
Sophie, it's so interesting throughout your story. I was just thinking about how that relates to me. I have a background in investment banking and in wealth management, and it totally aligns how I felt, aligns with how you felt when you used to work in the engineering field. So it's great that you saw that need, but you didn't see the companies have the capacity. So now you have a solution to help solve that problem. Great. So, I did mention earlier that a lot of people neglect negotiating benefits as part of their compensation package and only focus on salaries. Can you explain how those who proceed this way miss out on potential value or miss out on potential benefits that the actual workplace benefits have?
Yeah, this is such a great question and something we're really passionate about at the Thoughtful Co. The vast majority of our clients come to us and really just want to negotiate their base salary. And that's fair because salary, impacts our life so much. It helps us pay for expenses, all these things. But really, there are so many other components that you can negotiate that really can positively impact both your wealth and your enjoyment of work. The two biggest pieces for me that I'm really passionate about helping women better understand and then enable them to negotiate is one, bonus structure. And these usually aren't super complex, but when you get an offer, often it doesn't give you a lot of detail on the bonus structure. So asking questions of how it works, what the performance period is, when it actually gets paid out, what performance components are in there, and what are they based off of, gives you a really solid kind of baseline to then negotiate that bonus. And we support clients with negotiating a lot of sign on bonuses and things like that. So that's something really important to think about. And then the really big one for me is equity compensation. So stock options, RSUs, PSUs, share appreciation rights, carry programs, lots of different types. And equity compensation is super complex. It's not intuitive. I've been doing this for 9 years now, and sometimes there's still programs that I'm like, I don't understand how that works. And it's really not well explained. So it's kind of this black box. And especially as you get more senior in your career and get to, maybe a junior executive level, or, even if you're at a startup or technology firm, a lot of your compensation often is made up of equity comp. So it's this huge piece that is not well understood, but has a really big impact on our wealth. And so few people are negotiating it. And just from my perspective, there's so much room for negotiation. I've definitely seen that throughout my career. So that's the biggest piece for me, and really, educating people on how it works, and then knowing that you can negotiate it, and it's often flexible.
I mean, when we think about salary, obviously that's a financial part of it. When I say workplace benefits, probably a lot of people just think kind of in-kind benefits. But what you highlighted, Jillian, is really the sign-on bonus, which is also, or like a year-end bonus, which is also a financial benefit. And then stock options, clearly, that's something that accumulates over time, and that can be a very, very big add-on in terms of finances as well. So it's great that you highlighted that. So, assuming I am up for a raise, or maybe I'm looking to negotiate my raise, and I have a track record of success in my position, where would I start with preparing for that negotiation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I almost, leaning on what Jillian just said there too, I would almost start as the first step being prioritizing what's most important to you. Because I would say, not always, but oftentimes when our clients reach out to us, they are reaching out initially about base salary. And as we go through the conversation, there's typically other elements that will jump out that are really important to them. Potentially, it's vacation or flexibility and work from home days, could be title as well. And so thinking about what's most meaningful to you, so you can start thinking about what your non-negotiables are and what would be great to have, and then what's not necessarily important to you and doesn't need to be part of that conversation. And then we
Mm-hmm.
also, in terms of getting started in negotiation too, we often get the question, when should I negotiate? And we always say, do it as soon as you start thinking about it. It's not a great time to negotiate if you've let it stew for a really long time and been upset and waiting for someone to reach out to you to schedule that. As soon as you start thinking about it, you can reach out to your manager. And even if you're not in line with the typical performance review season, and just say, hey, I'd really like to talk to you about compensation. Do you have a little bit of time? And at least you can start having that conversation, and potentially it's not a yes or no right now, but at least they have that in the back of their head when performance review season does come up and budgets do come up. You've already communicated what you're looking for and what's meaningful to you. And I think having that open, early, and respectful communication is the best setup for everyone to be most happy in that conversation.
100%, I agree with you. So from your experience, and you guys work with women in helping them negotiate their compensations, is there usually a more common times in the year when women negotiate these benefits and salaries? Is April a good time? Maybe before summer, maybe midsummer, year end? Maybe there is a higher chance of a more successful outcome based on your experience. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think probably the biggest times are year end. So, whenever your company's year end season is, and we say, if you do have a year end performance review, make sure you're coming equipped to that with ready to have that compensation discussion. Because often we'll have clients come to us and they've already had that discussion, and then the budget's already set. And then they ask maybe a few weeks later, and it might be too late. So I think kind of being prepared for those year-end conversations. But then beyond that, it's, kind of as Sophie mentioned, it's always a great time to bring it up. When there's less time pressure, it's better for both involved. And it just, leaves more room for respectful conversation, and maybe your manager looking for budget, and maybe there's a mid-year budget that comes up and it's not super communicated, and you can kind of get in line for that. So bringing it up early is always helpful. And then another piece that you kind of mentioned, when you're already in a company, it's a lot of people don't think that they can be bringing up components like vacation or allowances or other terms, and flexible work schedules once they're already in a company. But we definitely see that happen a lot. So no, it doesn't just have to be base salary again in those discussions. It can be some of those other components in your offer.
I definitely want to focus on some of these benefits later on in our conversation. But before we move on to that, I want to ask you a few more questions on the process itself. So, as you mentioned, the timing really, the more time you give to the partner who you're negotiating with and yourself, the better. But in general, when you go in and you make your ask, obviously they'll take some time to think about it. What's kind of the accepted on the broader board timeline of when you can hear back, and can you, if you're not happy, can you go back and, I guess that's why we call it negotiation. But what's usually acceptable, back and forth timeline?
Yeah, it can be so variable company to company because it depends on what your reporting structure is. Potentially, you're negotiating directly with a manager who isn't the one that's ultimately making the decision on what the budget is. So they might be going to someone else or a collection of other people to get ultimate approval. So what I would say is framing it in a really positive way and keep having open conversations. It's okay to check in with your manager. You don't obviously want to be sending them a message every day, but if you haven't heard anything and it's been a couple of weeks, it's okay to check in with them. And it's also, if you've kind of completed your ask and they've said, great, I'm going to get back to you, it's also okay to say, great, thanks so much, I appreciate this conversation, what are you thinking about in terms of next steps and timeline, so you have an expectation as well, and so that you're not surprised and wondering what's happening in the background. And once
Mm-hmm.
you, if you start off that way, it makes it so much easier to check in, because they might say to you it'll be 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever it is. But in terms of a hard and fast rule in terms of timing, it is so dependent on the company reporting structure and the time of year that you ask. If it's in the peak of summer and your performance reviews were in March, then maybe it'll be a bit slower to hear back. But as long as you're open with your manager and they're open with you as well, then you have a better sense of how long that might take, and who
Mm-hmm.
is kind of involved in that discussion as well.
Sophia, I totally agree with you. And I want to emphasize for our listeners once again that it's very important, I think, once you make the original ask, to also ask what the potential timeline is. It definitely will make it much easier for you to follow up if you don't hear back. I have been in a position like that myself, and I have experience where the person took 4 or 5 months to get back to me. Definitely, I think that's a great tip. So now that we move on from the actual process into the nitty gritty of different benefits, what do you think are the benefits, workplace benefits, that are the easiest to negotiate?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, it kind of depends on industry and level. I would say one piece that we, just support a lot of our clients who are going to a new company and asking for are sign-on bonuses. They can
Mm-hmm.
be easier to negotiate for because they're not, part of your annual compensation structure that gets those annual increases. It's just a one-time amount for the company. So they're often quite a bit easier. We're actually seeing vacation be quite negotiable right now too, which is great. I think employers are starting to recognize that there's mass burnout in the workplace, and giving more vacation actually really is a positive thing. So if that's something important to you right now, definitely a good time to be asking about that. Flexible work schedules is another one. Of course, with COVID, there's been this opening up of the workplace. And even for some companies and organizations who have a return to office policy, we're still seeing, some negotiation within there. So maybe it's really important for you to work from home every Friday so you can be efficient on that day and not have to work all weekend. Bring that up front. We're definitely still
Mm-hmm.
seeing those pieces be quite negotiable, which is great.
Jillian, for the sign on bonuses, how many years of experience do you need to have for you to come into the new company and really have the power to ask for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And really, how we often help clients structure that ask around is, what are you walking away from at your last company? So, say
Mm,
you're at a current employer and you have a $5,000 bonus payout that's supposed to pay out in the next 3 to 4 months. Get your next employer to cover that full amount, because you would have gotten that if you weren't going to leave to your next employer. So that's kind of
mm-hmm,
good baseline. And of course, as you get more senior in your career, those bonus dollars usually get bigger. So the amount you can ask for usually gets bigger as well. But that's a really
mm-hmm,
solid number where you can feel really confident about asking for it. This is something concrete that you're walking away from. And, there can be other pieces in there. Maybe there's, a really good RRSP program that you're also walking away from, and some other components. And you can kind of include that in your sign on bonus ask. And maybe it's closer to 8,000 or whatever it might be.
mm-hmm.
So, kind of using what you have right now to help paint the picture for the employer and also make sure you feel really confident about what you're asking for.
I really like that perspective. And for the year end bonuses, is that something that you can also negotiate and discuss when you just join? Or is that something that employers usually are more open to talking about once they've seen your work ethic and progress and KPIs, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say with kind of bigger companies, they often have really structured policies in place where if you join at a certain point in the year, you may not be eligible for the bonus at all, and it's just like a yes or no switch off. It's
Mm-hmm.
not really negotiable. Or there's kind of performance already baked in, just target performance for that year. So it's a great point to bring up. Ask that question, especially if you're joining towards the year end, because we have had clients who've come to us and say, I didn't realize I wasn't getting, a prorated bonus for this year, which is
Mm-hmm.
really tough. And that can be another kind of excuse to ask for a bit more on a sign on bonus as well. So, really good one to be thinking about. That being said, for smaller companies, startups, stuff like that, it still can be really negotiable. So, some of these big companies have more structured processes in place, but the smaller ones we
Mm-hmm.
often see a lot is negotiable.
I think it just never hurts to ask, right?
Yes.
Even if it's not offered to you. Sophie, what do you think are the most often overlooked benefits? And maybe we can, I mean, you have experience in the engineering field, and Julian has experience in retail space. I'm not sure if it would differ, but I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think ones that jump out the most to me are things that might kind of come out of your account versus just coming in. So I think oftentimes when we think of compensation, people will think more of base salary or bonus. But say you're in a position where you're evaluating two offers, you're at a current company and role and going to a new one. Sometimes people may not realize or take for granted that their tech allowance was covered from at their old company. And, in Canada, for example, the phone plans are very expensive. So that's, an added thing that's coming out of your account. Or your health and dental, you might not get if it's a small startup that you're going to. Maybe they haven't established a plan yet. Um, and you might have specific healthcare needs that might not be covered. So I think some of those elements that go into your monthly spending are often forgotten about when
Mm-hmm.
evaluating multiple offers, and then what that kind of ultimate financial return is to you. And then other things as well, like if there's, say, a professional development and training allowance where you were able to kind of move ahead more quickly because you had access to this other training, which impacts your long term wealth. And now you're potentially paying for some of those courses out of pocket. So, all of those things that I think are quote unquote smaller items, but they can have big impacts in your long-term wealth and your career development too.
Totally. I have a few actually questions down the road specifically on these benefits. But Jillian, do you have anything to add before we move on?
Yeah, no, I think those are all great. The one other piece I was thinking about, which a lot of our clients don't really consider when they're negotiating, is things like title and role scope and role structure. Coming from a compensation background, compensation is so closely linked to role scope and vice versa. So if you're negotiating one, it's actually a great time to be negotiating the other. So maybe you're moving to a more senior role and you really want to make sure part of the administrative work that you've been doing your whole career is no longer included in that role scope.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you really want to be able to people manage one person in the next few years. So thinking about some of those pieces, which again are not traditional compensation negotiation pieces, but it's really a great time to be bringing them up.
Great point. I actually didn't even think about the title, so it's great that you mentioned that. But going back to what Sophie just mentioned, so with COVID, work from home, era is upon us, this flex time and hybrid schedule have become very common. Yet there are, I think, still a lot of industries who I think want to go back to traditional ways. So for people who find themselves in a position like that, how can they negotiate their flex time and hybrid schedules? If so, have you seen any examples like that?
Yeah, it's a great question because I find it does come up often in negotiations. And I find for a lot of the clients we work with, flexibility or the ability to work from home on certain days is often a front runner for a high priority item that people want to negotiate. And I would say lots of companies are kind of establishing their policies around work from home or wanting to bring people back into the office. But we still find in practice there is a lot of flexibility, especially on a case by case basis, and being able to just communicate why that is so valuable to you. And a lot of times it might be, I think Jillian touched on it earlier, being able to work from home on Friday, say, so I can be really productive on that day, get all my tasks done, and feel really good going into the weekend will make me feel better going into Monday as well. And I find being
Mm-hmm.
open about it and asking early is great. It can be more difficult sometimes once you're in role. Um, but at the same time, being open about why it's so valuable. And we find in general, companies are open to making custom situations for people. And potentially it's super important that everyone's in on Wednesdays because that's when all the team meetings are or whatever it may be. But Monday is a lower priority at that company. So being able to be a little bit flexible, but just open about where you're coming from and what is most meaningful for you to make you most productive. Because at the end of the day, people work very differently. Some people work super well in a really loud office with lots of people around, and some people work super well by themselves and maybe in an open concept office. You're not always able personally to be as productive as you can if you have some private time at home. So being open about the way you work as well.
Totally, clear communication is key, I think, and is the number one um, key to a successful team, I think, who blends well together. Another one I want to focus on is health and wellness benefits. You did mention that oftentimes we as people focus more on what's coming in versus what's coming out. So, health and wellness, I think, benefits are one of those. Maybe getting your company to cover your gym membership, a massage session once a week, if that's not included as part of your health benefits. That common? Is that something that you see often as well? And how can women negotiate that?
Yeah, definitely. Over the past year and a half, we are seeing more and more kind of fitness allowances or broader health and wellness or gym memberships, whatever it might be. So it's definitely becoming much more common. In almost every tech offer that we would see, it would be included. So definitely in the tech industry. And we know that industry has been through some ups and downs recently. But in general, we're still seeing employers are really struggling to attract and retain top talent. There's definitely been a subset of layoffs, but there's still so many companies who are really struggling with that. And a lot of them
Mm-hmm.
are realizing that these little pieces that are not huge expenses to the company can really make employees so happy. So kind of like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned before, we say it's always worth asking. And you can kind of start saying, is there any health and wellness benefit or allowance? And sometimes you'll find out there are, and they don't always communicate them up front. And if not, you can kind of structure it similarly, saying, it's really important for me to make it to this class every Thursday. And I'm wondering if I'd be able to get that covered. And the one piece just to think about that from a financial perspective is make sure they're also covering tax gross up too, depending on how they pay it out, if it's not an expense. But definitely worth it to ask. And it is it's a really small expense for the company, but can make a big difference for you. And it can be quite easy to get included in that offer. So especially if you're going to a new company, encourage you to ask if there's something, that gets you to perform and feel better about being at work.
Yeah. Another one I just thought about is covering maybe a parking. If you need to drive to your work, getting your company to cover that parking
Yes.
fee maybe on a monthly basis. Again, for them, it's a very small um, expense, but for you, it'll make a difference. Again, that difference between what's coming in and what's coming out. And Sophie, you did mention professional development credits. Can we give a short explanation as to what that is? Because I find it's not super common, at least from talking to people in my network. I don't find that a lot of companies offer that. So, can you give a quick explanation of what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So professional development can include anything from training and going to full workshops or any kind of education that you want to go to. Sometimes in certain industries, say for engineering, for example, it can be up to going to get your master's in a particular field, but it can also be taking a day of training, one session a year. And I find historically a lot of times it's more negotiated on a case by case. Like I found this particular course that's really important to me, but I would say there is a bit more of a trend to having an annual budget for professional development because there is so much value to both the employer and the employee for people to be continually developing and looking for opportunities to continue growing. So it is something you can talk about early if you have, say, a particular course that you're interested in or a type of training. It can be easier to negotiate for that if you can identify that specific one and the costs associated with it. But you can also be open about long-term learning and seeing if your company does have a program like that as well. And we are seeing more similar to the health spending account approach, a little bit more programs like that for professional development where you get X dollars a year that potentially you need approval for the specific course, but in general can use that towards training.
Yeah, no, the reason why I wanted to highlight this benefit in particular is because I think it's out of everything we discussed, it's the one that benefits both the employer and the employee, and that can be in part your negotiating power in it. Perfect. So, as we wrap our conversation, are there any top tips you'd like to share with our audience as to what they should keep in mind when negotiating workplace benefits?
Yeah, I think we often get asked similar questions, and our answer isn't the most flashy one, but I think it is really important. Allocate the time to yourself. We work so hard for our companies and we add so much value, but we don't spend that much time, and we don't work that hard making sure we get the best possible offer. So allocate the time to yourself, do your research, work with mentors or advisors or your network to practice what you're going to say, feel really good about it. We often say block your morning before you're having a performance review or a conversation so you can feel really positive going into it. And yeah, allocate that time, especially I think as women who we support with our clients, we're used to allocating time to a lot of other people and not ourselves. And we find if you really prepare and feel good about what you're saying, you're never going to feel 100% confident when negotiating. But if you feel good about it, it will go well. Even if it's a not, a no right now, it might be a yes in the future. So really giving yourself that space and time and prep to feel good about it.
Totally. Sophie, what about you?
Sort of similar, but a different version of investing time. I think the one that jumps out at me is we live in such a busy world, and I think we're often running from meeting to meeting or event to event or whatever it is. And I know from my own personal experience, I can think of a particular negotiation of mine that went poorly, and I had done all this prep time. Maybe not as much as I would now in hindsight, but I felt good the night before, and then fast forward to the day of, I had a meeting right up until that meeting with my manager, and I had a meeting right after, and I was not present in that moment. And what
Mm-hmm.
I would say now is blocking off time and before and after that, so you can go in just thinking about that. You're not rushing, you're not stressed about another meeting that ended or something you have to do right after, and so you feel that it can take longer if it needs to, and you're not running to the next thing. So taking space and taking off the morning if you can, if you have the capacity to do that, so you can feel very well rested going into it as well.
I totally agree with both of you on that. I think what I'd add on my end is when you're offered a new position and you're given a new compensation package, just to not sign anything on the spot. And also going back to the whole time idea, take the time to really think it through. And maybe if you have any connections in the company already, discuss, if it's common, if it's not common, what you were offered. I'm not sure if that's what you guys usually do, or if you kind of provide your clients with I don't know, trends across this particular industry as to what companies in tech or in engineering or in finance usually offer on that end. Kind of understanding what the average is and where you fall on that range would be my tip, I think.
Yeah, that's such a good one. Not We always say that to our clients, no matter what they offer you, don't agree to it right away. Take it away, think about it, and process it, because you're not
Yeah.
thinking straight. It's an emotional conversation.
Emotional. Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And taking that time to just practice your gracious thank you, I'm going to take it away and think of it, so you don't get tempted to say yes in the moment if it surprises you, and just say thank you. That's very kind of you. I'm going to take that away and think about it. I think practicing that is important too, so that you feel comfortable taking it away and giving yourself
Yeah, and I
space.
mean, companies know that it's common for you to take time to digest it. It's not rude to not be giving an answer right away,
Exactly.
right? One more thing I wanted to actually say: sometimes the company would not be open to raising a salary, really that financial part. So I think negotiating the benefits at least. So, ladies, I wrap up every episode with two blitz questions. So, first one is, what does financial freedom mean to you?
Awesome. Okay, I'll start. Financial freedom means to me, uh, it's such a personal thing for each person, and I think I've learned this in my own journey with finances, and then also through so many of our clients. It looks very different to each person, and I think a lot of the times we think about financial freedom as just monetary, but really, and I went through my own journey with this too. You can be making a good amount of money and still not feel like you have financial freedom because you don't have time or space to really be enjoying it. So I think it's so personal to each person, and yeah, really not getting caught up in maybe what someone else wants and determining what that is for you. I think that's really what financial freedom means to me.
I like that. Sophie, what about you?
Yeah, I think on a similar vein, getting a strong understanding of what your needs and wants are will be your goal to financial freedom, because ultimately what you need to make you happy will look very different even from some of your closest friends. And I find when you're not dialed into what your wants and needs are, that's when I think I can hear things from friends where they feel jealous of what someone else is making, or having some of those strange reactions to the people around us. And ultimately, if you're very focused on what your own needs and wants are, it makes you better at celebrating what everyone else has, because that's their needs and wants, it's not yours. And I think having that approach can also help you get better educated on compensation. You'll feel more comfortable sharing with people around you. And if it turns out that that person's needs and wants are aligned with yours, then maybe that's a push for you to feel that you should potentially go and negotiate for a little bit more, or look at opportunities if that is what really aligns with what you're looking for as well, and not the people around you.
I like how you took it back and kind of put a bow around our conversation with your answer. My next question is, and I guess you both kind of answered it already, but what would be your advice to women who are working to achieve financial security and freedom?
Yeah, I think kind of the first one, personalize it to you and then also ask for what you want. So many of our clients have been thinking about asking for months or years, or, we work with senior executives who are powerhouse women and they've never negotiated in their career. So, don't be nervous to ask for what you want. And within compensation, if you don't ask for something, you're not likely going to get it. So, that would be kind of my advice to all women. And it's easier said than done, but you can start small and build up.
Perfect.
And I would say if it's approached with respect and kindness and positivity, it's always okay to ask. Just ask the question. And then at the very least, you've communicated where you stand and what you're looking for. And even if it's a no, it might be a what are the steps then to get there? So, how do I get there? And at least at that point, now you and your manager have a clear understanding of what you're looking for long term. And now you can, at the very least, leave the plan to get there.
I agree with you. Jillian and Sophie, thanks a lot for being with us today and for sharing your wealth of knowledge on negotiating compensation. If anyone from the In Her Wallet community wants to get in touch with you, wants to work with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so our website is www.thethoughtfulco.net. You also can connect with us on LinkedIn, The Thoughtful Co., or Sophie and I's LinkedIn profiles. And we're on Instagram at thethoughtful.co. We have a lot of different services for women in negotiating, from one-on-one prep sessions to contract review to financial modeling of compensation if it's more complex, to workshops. So we really tailor our services to where you're at and your needs. And yeah, we'd love for you to reach out. We always love to chat about compensation and benefits.
Okay, In Her Wallet community, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please share it with your friends and family and whoever you think might find it useful. I thank you all for being with us today. As always, I want you to give yourself credit for showing up for yourself and your future, because every time you increase your financial knowledge, you increase what's financially possible for you. Thank you all, and I'll see you next week.